Well, I'm thankful to be here with you this morning. I know there's just a lot going on in our world right now, and to be able to be here and to simply be in the presence of God together, to be challenged together and to grow is such a special thing. I want to just remind you of a couple things coming up. Sean announced some of them earlier, but just a quick thing. Tonight, we would love for you to join us for Thanksgiving dinner. It's at 6 o'clock. It's in the multi-purpose building. You can bring a side dish or a dessert, or if you don't have time to go home today and make something, don't worry about it. Just come. Just be a part of it. We'd love for you to be a part of that tonight. What we're going to do, what you can expect tonight, we're going to celebrate where we have been in 2018. Now, if you think back over the last few months, as I have done a lot this past week, in the past couple weeks, 2018 has been absolutely full of things. It has just been a full year, and we get to celebrate what God has done in our body of believers and how He has used us for the kingdom and is setting us up for the kingdom in the future, which is what we're also going to talk about, where we're going in 2019. Now, one thing that will be different tonight than any other dinner we've ever had is this: we will affirm our elders and deacons tonight, so we'll have a few of the business things and those kind of things tonight. Instead of a Sunday morning affirmation, we'll do that tonight at dinner. That list of names is in your bulletin if you'd like to know those. And just a reminder, members, partners of Osage Christian Church who are 16 or older and have been in regular attendance are able to affirm those elders and deacons tonight for 2019. Next week, we will have everybody here, kindergarten and up. So there will be preschool programming, but all elementary students will be in here with us. We're going to have a family Sunday and celebrate together. And so just be prepared for that. I will hopefully tailor a message a little bit more toward kids. Hopefully. I'm not really great at that, so my wife and my daughters and my sons are probably going to have to help me and say, yeah, no, that's not going to work. So for that, if you have been attending Osage Hills for just a short time, we've had a lot of people who have been 6 months or less at the church. And what I'd like to do for you, and we would like to do for you, is on December 2nd at 12:30, we're going to have just a lunch to just discover Osage Hills, learn what it is to partner with us, learn our history of who we are and kind of where we've come from. And so if you are one of those people, I would love for you to go to osagehills.com/connect and register for that lunch that day. It's absolutely free to you. We just want you to come and learn about the church, learn who we are, and learn what it means to maybe partner with us in the future. That being said, here's what I want you to do. I need you to grab a Bible. Your Bible, your phone app to a Bible, grab a Bible in the chair in front of you, and we're going to put some scriptures on the screen, some references. I want you to turn to all three of those. Put your finger in one place as you hold it, or whatever you need to do, but you're going to need all three of these kind of open in front of you. Apparently, maybe. John 13, 34, and 35 is the first one you're going to. 1 John 2, 7 through 11, and then 2 John 5 through 6. It's not a mistake. We're not reading entire chapters. 2 John is one chapter, so we're only reading a couple of verses. So if you would just turn to those, find them. I'm going to give you a moment to do that, and just kind of get your fingers in those places. Here's what we're going to do for a moment. We're going to read this. And so what you're going to do is get something to take notes on, or just mental notes, but something to take notes on right to the sides. I want you to see and discover what are the similarities and differences between these passages and why they matter. Okay, we're going to talk about that today, why it matters. Now, our entire subject today, this you've seen on your bulletin title and all these kind of things, what it is, it's kind of an enigma if you really get down to it. And so we're going to try and discover really what we are being taught, specifically through John's writings. John was probably the closest apostle to Jesus, his closest disciple, the one he calls himself, the one whom Jesus loved. And so we're going to try and figure out, what is John trying to get across? What is the main teaching that John wants to get across today from these three writings, his gospel and these two letters, and how does it apply to us? Okay, if you're there, we're going to start in John 13:34. Here we go. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Okay? 1 John 2, 7 and following. Remember, you're writing down similarities and differences in between these two passages and the next one as well. Beloved, I am writing you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness, and does not know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. Okay, a lot of confusing, but remember, all you're looking for is what are the similarities and differences between this and John 13:34. Just look at that real quickly, write those down, and then we'll go on to the next one in a moment. 2 John 5 and 6. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Now, if you notice, there are just a few words that are very similar in between these two passages. I hope you saw them. One of those things is that all three passages refer to this new commandment. And we're going to get into what that is, and you may have seen that in there, but the new commandment. Now, interestingly, just a little, biblical history here, a little learning. This phrase, a new commandment, is only used in those four passages that you read. Those really three. It's only used in John 13, 1 John 2, 7 and 8, and in 2 John 5. It's only used, it's used 4 times in the entire Bible, twice in 1 John 2, 7 and 8, once in John 13, 34, once in 2 John 5. That's the only time this is used. Anyway, okay? Those references. That's the only time that's used. Now that is significant because it's something that John has honed in on here, and he's saying, this is important. I want to get this across. Okay, now the other thing that you may have seen is that there is this overuse, not overuse, but there's this word that keeps repeating. It repeats everywhere. Anybody know what that is? Just shout it out if you caught it.
Love.
Love, right? Yeah, love. Okay, and John says, love one another. All right? That is over and over and over here. So we have this idea that there is a new commandment and that we are to love one another. And so if this is what John keeps saying and he keeps repeating, then it must be important, and we need to understand why this is important. Now, if it's only used a few times, this new commandment, but if you noticed, I hope you noticed, did you notice there's some things that John says a little differently? Like, he's quoting Jesus and saying, a new commandment I give you in John 13. But then in 1 John, he's saying, well, but it's not really a new commandment, but it's an old commandment. It's something new and old. Did you catch that? And he says, I'm giving you a new commandment, but it's really an old commandment. So my question is, how can something new be old? How can something old be new? All right, that's valid. So here's where we look and see. Now, the Greek language is obviously different than English. None of us could probably open a Bible right now and go, hey, let me just read in Greek. I don't, maybe a couple of you can. I cannot. I have to study these words. But the Greek word used here is kainos. Now, the Greek language has several different words for new. Okay, we have really one word for new, and we say it in a whole lot of different ways. Now, this word kainos, this is what it means. It is the implication that something has been remodeled. So think about like 57 Chevy has been restored. Or you remodel your kitchen. Or if you attended our church before last July, then you would have seen a building that looked like this. A room that we're sitting in right now that looked like this. Right? Maybe. There's a mouse on the screen. There we go. Look like this, right? Orange pews, maroon pews, orange carpet, Richard Shields on his knees unscrewing a pew there. Right? No, that's but this is what it looked like. And if you attended this church and been in this room at any point since July 22nd of this year, just a few months ago, then you know it doesn't look like this anymore. It looks like this. You can take that down. Because it's been remodeled. It's been made new. Now, what we need to understand is the room does not have a new purpose. We do the same things in here and sing the same songs in here that we sang beforehand. The room has no new purpose. This room is designed for believers and those who are seeking Jesus to come together and to worship Him and to learn about Him. That's the purpose of a sanctuary, the purpose of a worship center. That's what we do in here. It has no new purpose, but it looks new. It has a new identity, a little bit, because it looks different. It's a fresh look, it's a clean look, it's different than what it once was. That's what this word kainos is. It's that something has been restored to be made new. Now, we're going to talk about this word a little bit more next week as we look at Revelation 21:5, when God on the throne says, "Behold, I am making all things new." It's that same word. But today we just need to understand, Jesus, even though he says, "A new commandment I give you," may not actually be giving us something that is new, but something that has existed from the beginning of time. That's even what John says later in one of the letters that we just read. He said it's existed. It's been since the beginning of time. This old commandment that is new. So what is that commandment? We find that in Leviticus 19:18. It's on page 95 of the Bible in front of you. Okay, Leviticus 19:18. Now, if anybody asks you what you did in church today, you can say, well, you know, we looked at 1,000 different pages. No, okay. 19:18, Leviticus 19:18. Here, and we're going to start in verse 17. Here's what he says. He says, "You shall not hate your brother." This is God giving laws to his people. Most of you, if you've ever tried to read the Bible, have probably gotten really bored in Leviticus and may have missed this. Okay? And skipped and go, I'm going to skip Leviticus. But here's what he says. "You shall not hate your brother in your heart," which sounds very familiar to 1 John 2, when he says, if you have hatred in your heart for your brother and you don't have love. Right? "You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him." This reasoning frankly is something all the world could take notice of. "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall do what? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." So God is speaking an old commandment here that Jesus then redeems. He restores, he revitalizes in the New Testament when he's asked, and we see this in Mark 12, we see this in Matthew and Luke, when Jesus is asked this question, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, well, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, which is from Deuteronomy 6. But the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is taking something old. He's making it new. He's calling it out in his people and saying, this is what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to take the old commandment and make it new. So if you turn back to John 13, we're going to see exactly what Jesus asked us to do, and how Jesus asked us to do this very thing that we've seen over and over and over, to love one another. Now, John 13, let's just get an idea of the context where we are. John 13 begins with Jesus and his disciples going into an upper room to eat the Passover meal for the last time. The meal has been prepared, the candles are lit, or whatever it was to get some light in this room in the evening. The places are set out, the pillows are there for them to sit down, and they walk into the room. And each man goes and he sits where he's supposed to be. But they forgot something. Just like we tell our kids to go and wash their hands before they eat, when we do that, just, hey, I need to wash my hands before I eat, I need to wash up. They would traditionally wash up. But that usually meant their feet, because they all wore sandals. And they all walked along the same dusty roads that camels and oxen and donkeys and everything else walked along, and left everything behind for people to walk in. And their feet were dirty. And traditionally, there would have been a servant sitting in the room to wash their feet. But as they walked in that night, there was just a wash basin and a pitcher to pour water and a towel. And what had to happen that night is that somebody had to wash the feet. So if you know the story, in John 13, you're looking at it right there, here's what happened. Jesus takes off his outer garment, he wraps a towel around himself, he pours the water into the basin, and he begins to wash their feet. Peter gets on to it and says, no, Lord, you're not washing my feet. He puts Jesus in this high position, and Jesus is like, look, if you don't let me do this, you have no part of it. Like, let me do this for you. Jesus, who is the greatest in the room, there's no question that he's the greatest in the room, becomes the least. He becomes the servant. Jesus, who has the absolute most power in that place to do really whatever he wants, says, no, I'm going to use all of my power to serve in the lowliest position I can possibly think of to serve in this moment. And that's what he does. He washes their feet. He washes the feet of Peter, of James, John, Thaddeus, Matthew, all of the apostles, even Judas. Then they eat a meal. They celebrate Passover. He changes everything about Passover in that moment. He says, yeah, now it's really about me, because you're going to remember this cup to celebrate me, and that's what we do. So he changes everything. Judas leaves to go betray him. Jesus knows what's happening, and shortly after Judas leaves to betray him, Jesus and his disciples, the remaining ones that are there, get up and they walk out to the garden. And he talks to them. John 13:31, they'd gone out, and he said, the Son of Man is now glorified. God is glorified in him. If God is glorified, God will also glorify him in himself. And he goes, little children, I'm with you just for a little bit. You're going to seek me, but you won't find me. I won't be here. Where I'm going, you cannot come. But a new commandment I give to you. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. We've already seen that Jesus says this is a new commandment. You are to love one another. Now we see why. Because Jesus has modeled love for us. Jesus modeled love for us. So here's what he's saying. He's going, just as I loved you, then you love each other. Because I have modeled this. I have shown you this. This is his final hour. Jesus is nearing the cross. He's taking his disciples out to the garden. He's going to talk to them for the last time. And interestingly enough, John uses more language and more teaching here in between the time of the Passover meal and the cross of anyone else. This is where he says, abide in me. This is where the high priestly prayer of Jesus in John 17 happens. But the first thing Jesus says is, I've loved you, now love one another. So in that moment, these disciples are sitting there and they're going, wait a minute, what is he talking about? And really quickly, it's not too hard to go, oh, Jesus just washed our feet. And maybe later, they're looking at Judas coming back to betray him and they're going, he washed his feet too. He loved us well. And for us to love one another well, we have to understand first the love that we've been given. They had no clue the cross was coming. They didn't know. They just thought, hey, we're eating the Passover meal, now we're going out to talk in the garden because Jesus wants to teach us. They didn't know the crucifixion was coming. We know on the other side of this what Jesus has done for us. And because of the love that we have been given in him, because we didn't deserve it, and yet he gave it, and he forgave our sins on the cross, and he rose again on the third day to give us life, then we love one another. Not because it's commanded, but because we've experienced it. In teaching his disciples, Jesus simply pointed them back to everything they had already seen. He pointed them back to the washing of the feet. And if we just look at John's gospel, if you flip back to the beginning and you walk with me through this, and just look at this real quickly. John 3, Jesus loves Nicodemus when he meets him in the middle of the night, and Nicodemus, a Pharisee, wants to know about what it is to follow Jesus. You must be born again, he tells him. And then he says the passage we all know, or most people know in the world, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting, eternal life. And then John 3:17, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. He showed love. In John 4, he goes to the Samaritan woman at the well. This woman who had had 5 husbands and was living with another man at this point, living in sin. And she comes out to the well in the heat of the day because she really doesn't want to see anybody else, because she's shamed by it. And Jesus talks to her. He shows love to her. In John 5, Jesus goes to the pool of Bethesda, and there's this guy who, as the water is stirred up, the belief was that you would be healed if you got to it, but this guy who was so crippled and lame that he couldn't even get there, Jesus says, let me just heal you. Get up and walk. And then in John 6, he feeds 5,000 people. In John 8, he gives dignity to a woman who is caught in the act of adultery. You know how he shows love to her? Speaking grace and truth. I do not condemn you, go and sin no more. In John 9, he heals a blind man. In John 11, he raises Lazarus from the dead. And now in John 13, he has shown his disciples love by washing their feet, by making himself a servant. A side note, there's a lot of times in the church world that we're like, hey, let me wash your feet. And, washing feet is weird. We don't wash people's feet anymore. That's weird. But we can take on the act of a servant and serve people well. Because that's what Jesus was doing in that moment. He was serving others. Not for glory, not to be seen, but to simply serve others. And so Jesus modeled this for us. And the thing we must remember is that Jesus' command to love one another was not left in the garden to his disciples, to those closest to him. And we also need to remember that he's talking to those closest to him, to those who claim to follow him. That would be us. But this command continued throughout history. John wrote about it 3 different times. He wrote about it to the church. And what Jesus has modeled has not become our mission. What has been modeled for us has become the mission. Just as I have loved you, you are to love one another. That's exactly what Jesus says. So love becomes the mission because it has been modeled for us by Jesus. And because he has asked us to do the very thing that we have seen him do. If we've experienced his love, then we love. That's simply what we're asked. It's a new commandment, but it's really old, but it's new again. And he is restoring it for his followers. And sometimes we simply need to remind ourselves that this is what Jesus has asked us to do. I read a quote this week from D.A. Carson. Here's what he says. He says, the command to love one another is simple enough for a toddler to memorize and appreciate. Stop right there. So it's simple enough for us to look at a toddler and say, hey, you're to love one another. And they can memorize that. Love one another. Okay. How do I love? Oh, I can share my toys. I can give a hug. Toddlers, little kids have this knack for knowing when you're hurting or you're broken and giving you a hug. Whether you want it or not. They have this knack for loving you despite what you have done to them. They love. They love big. It's simple. It's simple to understand how to love one another. They can memorize that. They can appreciate that. On the other side, it is profound enough that the most mature believers are repeatedly embarrassed at how poorly they comprehend and put it into practice. And that's hard. Because at some point in our lives, we realize that we're commanded to love one another, and yet we understand that our selfishness prevents us from doing that often. We realize that as kids we were taught to share, and as adults we hold tight. I hold tight to things. Not that I don't like to share, but man, I struggle. I can be pretty possessive of things. I don't like to loan them out because they might go missing. Then I might not know where this thing that I have is, but does it really matter? Love needs to be shown to each other, especially in the church, regardless of what might happen. Kindness goes a long way. I hope that my boys grow up to understand that they can hold doors for people regardless of the situation. I hope that my children grow up to understand that they can love people and simply be kind. Because kindness might be more difficult than getting angry, but it's always right. Love doesn't have to be complex to be shown. It doesn't have to be this big thing to be shown. It can be shown in a thank you. Tonight at the dinner, there's going to be 200 different thank you cards. I'm asking you each to grab one, write a thank you note to somebody this week, and just tell them how much you appreciate them. And mail it. Love can be as simple as getting a cup of coffee for somebody. It's as simple as looking somebody in the eyes when you talk to them. One of the worst things about me, if 1 Corinthians talks about how love is patient, I am impatient to a fault, especially when it comes to conversation. because I love to interrupt and not to listen. And sometimes love can be shown the easiest in the times when we listen before we think. And we take the time to think about what we're going to say. I'm terrible at this. Like, I'm learning. And love for one another means that I have to love regardless. Learning is hard. Growing is hard. But that's exactly what God is calling us to do, and to love. And so sometimes we need to love by listening with our ears and our eyes and closing our mouths. And as our understanding of love we've been given in Jesus grows, and our understanding of how to love others grows as well. You know, it starts here, and then it moves out to the world. And if you look at John 13:35, not only has Jesus modeled love for us, and love has now become our mission because he loves us, but Jesus actually says this. He says that love defines us as his followers. They will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. The they is the world. The us are those in churches all over the world. You know, more than one story could be shared about how churches have done this whole biting and devouring of one another, and this infighting and throwing each other under the bus, and not realizing that we're on the same team for Jesus, and just going, I don't like you, I'm not going to get along with you, or I don't like what you're doing, so I'm not going to get along with that. Man, we do that to ourselves all the time. You know what that does? The world outside looks in and goes, if that's the way they treat each other, I don't want any part of that. Because there are more people in the world who actually understand Jesus' commands to love than the church lives out. Was it Gandhi who said, I love the teachings of your Jesus, but I don't like his followers? That's sad. If that's how the church has been defined. Now, I'm not saying that's how we're defined, but I am saying that there are sometimes when we need to simply look at this and go, okay, it's simple to understand, it's profound, and we beat ourselves up sometimes because we don't do it well, or sometimes we think we do it well and we realize, I've fallen here or failed here. It's okay. Really the idea is we have to get up and love. DC talks that love is a verb, so we go out and do it. Right? Princess Bride, love, true love. We honor here, that may have been the high schoolers I'm talking about that. But it's love. We live out love to the world because of Jesus, and people know us by our love. That's how we are defined. 1 John 4:7. If you'll turn there, it's page 1023. John actually dives deeper into this thought. And John, remember, he's the disciple whom Jesus loved. He is just this idea. He keeps bringing this back up over and over and over. Here's what he says in 1 John 4:7 and 8, right? And he says this, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. Where is love from? It's from God. Whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God. Because, God is love. The very definition. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us. It was made for us to see that God sent his only Son into the world that we might live through him. And in this love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. If God loved us, we love God. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. We love because love is from God, and God is the definition of love. His love is actually perfected in us if we love one another. But if we don't love one another, then John's saying here, you are not from God. If you can't love each other, then you are not from God. You are not his disciples. You are not his followers. There are some times when we say things, and when I look at Scripture and I go, man, I don't like that. Like, that's not any fun. I want the fun, happy Jesus. Well, the fun, happy Jesus also says, you know what? It's going to cost you something to follow me. And that cost is love. And this is actually how my love is manifest to the world by you. You are my vessels. You are the ones who take this love out to the world. You love one another in the church so that you can love the world well. It's actually the defining factor of who you are. People will know you are my disciples by your love. The old hymn, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Let me ask you this. Let's say we have two couples, two married couples. And your job is to simply observe them for a week. Okay? Couple A, over here. You watch them. They've been married, let's say, 20 years. And you watch them for a week. You watch how they speak to each other. You watch their affection for each other. And what you see is that everything they say to each other is negative. They don't build each other up at all. They batter each other. They do not speak anything kind or affirming. They never hold hands. You never see them kiss. You never see them really even want to be in the same room together or look at each other or do anything together. But they've been married and they say they're in love. Do you believe them? What about couple B? Married 20 years, same amount of time, and you watch them and they speak kind and affirming words to each other. They build each other up. And they look at each other in a way that you go, man, there's something different there. They hold each other's hands in their public. They give kisses as often as they can. They gross their kids out. What do you say about that family? About those? What do you say about them? Do they love each other? What about these guys? If we can tell how people feel about each other, a love for each other based on their actions, don't you think the world can do the same about us? We can say that we love each other all we want. But if the world doesn't see us actually putting that into practice, they're never going to believe us. And they're never going to trust us when we say, I want to love you the same way that Christ loved me. I'm not saying that we are poor at this, because I don't think we are. What I am saying is we simply need to be reminded of what Jesus calls out in us. You know, Robin and I were talking about this last night, and she made a point that has just stuck with me. If it were just a commandment, we would gripe and complain all the way to doing it. Last night, I had a weird day yesterday. I was kind of in and out, popping in and out of the house, and just one thing after another. It wasn't ever bad. It was just people needed help, and so yeah. And I was in and out, and I was home for about 15 minutes, and I looked at one of my kids, and I said, can I just watch the K-State game for 15 minutes, please? Just for the little bit of time at home. It ended up being about 5 minutes, because then Steve rang the doorbell, we went to do something else. But we were there just for a moment, and do you know what the response was? My kids aren't always like that, but 95% of the time, you know. I'm kidding. I love you kids. If all that Jesus did was command us, I'm going to do this, and you have to do this, then we would roll our eyes all the time and say, there's nothing to it. But because Jesus loved us well, then we understand that love and we take it to the world. Because he loved us well, we can take it out to a world that is watching and waiting. And if love is lived in these walls between us, then people are going to see that love and want something to do with it. They're going to want to experience it. They will genuinely know that we care for each other and that they are cared for when they walk in these doors and when they're not in these doors. Because that's our job. That's who we say we are. Connecting Christ to where you live means that you are going out, and the love that you experience here flows to the world. The people, the things that you experience, the worship of God that we have flows out from here. I love that we get to come together. I would have it no other way than to meet with other believers on a Sunday morning. I love this because it mobilizes us and energizes us to go out. When the church does what Jesus asked us to do, because of what we've experienced in him, the world takes notice. You know, that night in the garden, Jesus could have told his disciples anything. Anything. He could have said, hey, I'm the Son of God, and I'm just going to end all this right now. But he didn't. Instead, he said, just as I have loved you, love one another. just as I have done this for you, now you go out. And guess what? Everybody is going to know who you are because of the way you love one another. It's often said if it's repeated in Scripture, then it's important, and you need to pay attention. And 3 times in 2 verses, Jesus says, love one another, love one another, love one another. And the same message carries on to us today. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or if you, whatever. I don't care who you voted for. I really don't. Because that's not what it's about. It's about unification in Jesus Christ. And so often we get mixed up on what we believe outside of Jesus that we forget who we are in Him. And we become so divisive amongst ourselves that the world doesn't really want anything to do with it. But we have to love well. So how do we do this? This is really the question that has bugged me all week. This is an enigma, right? It's simple enough for a child to understand and profound enough for mature believers to really struggle with. It's an enigma. How do you say, well, love each other? I have a few ideas, but they're small. They're simple. We can be kind to one another. We can really care for people outside of these doors and in these doors, and we can just love one another well. You know, Thanksgiving is this week. There are going to be times and opportunities with your families that you are going to be annoyed. You are going to be at each other's throats. It could be difficult. Love well. Instead of turning on a football game, go and, help do dishes. Talk to that one family member that nobody else is talking to. Serious. I'm right there. There are going to be times this week when it is just going to be a little bit hard, a little bit tense, because our family lives away from each other. And we're around each other as a big family, not very often. And our family's the outside component. Everybody else is close. And sometimes that brings tension. So I've got to learn to step in and love well. Thursday morning is a great time to step in and say, you know what, I'm going to help deliver turkey meals to people who do not have that. It's a great time to just say, you know what, I'm going to love you because you need love. Thank you note. Pick up the phone and call somebody. Step in and help when somebody's hurting. I don't know. That's the thing. This is such an enigma that we can't really quantify it. We can't really say, this is how you show love. But I do know this. Each of us is uniquely designed to live out the command of Jesus because we have been given love by Him. We have unique sins. They're unique to us. We struggle with different things, and yet we've all been shown love and forgiveness in Jesus Christ. And so what we do is we say, you know what? It's a new commandment to me. It's a new commandment to followers of Jesus. And He has restored what was old, to love your neighbor as yourself, and He's saying, go do it still. And so we love one another. We love because Jesus loved us, and He modeled that, and it becomes our mission, and we love because, you know what? Others know we are disciples. We become the least. We make ourselves servants so that others might know Jesus. And everything we do is to point to Him. It's not about us. It's not about making our name known. It is always about Jesus and following what He has asked us to do because of the love that we have experienced. We go and we love well. Father, I pray that You would help us to live this out this week. I don't even know how to do this. But as the week goes on, God, I ask that You would give me opportunities and You would give each person in this room opportunities to love well because of You. Help us, God, to seek Your face, to follow Your name and Your word, and to simply go. God, may we go to a world that is broken and hurting and love them. And may we go to each other who are broken and hurting and love each other. Thank You for Your grace and mercy. Thank You for the cross and giving us life. It's in Your name I pray. Amen. We're going to sing. If you have a decision to make, if there's something God's laying in your heart, if you're just struggling with this, somebody that you know is going to be hard to love this week, I'd love to pray with you. Somebody else would love to pray with you. Just come and talk to me. Let's stand.